Uh, we're going to be having a kind of interview session with Paula Krebs, who jumped in a little early at my invitation. Um, Paula is Executive Director of the Modern Language Association, an important entity in our space, particularly is related to the humanities, and one of the sponsors of this event. So thank you very much, Paula. Want to talk with you about some of the issues that we raised today, um, but more importantly, kind of give you an opportunity to put uh, this issue into perspective of what is the status of monographs, where are monographs headed. This is an important area for many of your members. Um, what, from your perspective, how would you characterize the outlook for the monograph or for long-term form of content distribution in the coming decade? Where do you think things are going when it comes to long-form content?
I mean, I don't think long form content is going anywhere. I think, especially in the humanities, people need to develop the kind of in-depth argument that works its way through a monograph. That's a form that will remain. That's important to the way we make knowledge in the humanities. How that's delivered will probably be a lot more varied. The MLA back in 2007 did a task force on for tenure and promotion that urged tenure and promotion committees to stop holding the monograph up as the gold standard in the humanities, that anybody who was going to get tenure or promotion in language and literature was still kind of required to do 1 or 2 books in order to do that. And already back by then, people were publishing in a lot of different ways, and the most innovative scholarship was ending up being disadvantaged by it. In tenure promotion processes. So but in recommending a new attention to a variety of forms of publishing, we weren't dissing the monograph. Some of my best friends write monographs. I think they're really absolutely essential to what we do, and you'll see them all over the MLA International Bibliography, as well as on the shelves in back of me. But it's not a but, it's an and new forms of publishing are supplementing that. Sometimes are taking off from monographs, sometimes are supplementing monographs, sometimes are existing completely on the side of monographs. We as an organization are trying to get ahead of, catch up with that in a way. In terms of tenure and promotion standards, in 2011, we issued guidelines for tenure and promotion committees for considering digital scholarship, for how to consider non-traditional publishing in tenure and promotion standards. But I mean, those are 10 years old. Those are out of date already, and we're having to reissue those. So I mean, there's a lot of change happening, but I guess I do want to assert that the long form development, careful archive-based, often development of an argument is here to stay.
Mm-hmm. So related to that, specifically that 2007 report and the subsequent 2011 report, there was a recommendation that these other forms of content should be recognized, kind of rethinking the dominance of the monograph and promoting scholarship, all other pathways to tenure, and the portfolio development associated with that. I'm wondering if you see, from your position, have seen indications that that change is occurring slowly. I mean, I know the tenure process doesn't change overnight, but I'm wondering if you're seeing movement in that direction.
We are seeing it. Part of it is thinking about the role of of a disciplinary association in both recognizing that change and in facilitating that change. So, for example, we have a certificate of a certification process for scholarly editions. Now, we have always, we have very strict standards. The Committee on Scholarly Editions has very strict standards for what constitutes a truly scholarly edition of a work of literature. And that no longer has to be between covers. We now issue certificates. We validate scholarly editions that are digitally based. Some of the most fascinating work that's being done in scholarly editions is not on paper, and we recognize that. And so when we certify, we can use a certain power, the imprimatur of the MLA to recognize change in the field. But also, so right now I'm working with a committee that's of an ad hoc committee of the MLA that's in addition to a committee that's being formed to update the guidelines on digital scholarship. There's a committee working now on public scholarship. So how in tenure and promotion cases, do you recognize work that goes into collaborative work with community groups, or collaborative work between your students and community groups and yourself as a scholar? How do you recognize the difference between publishing a deeply scholarly informed article in Lapham's or the LA Review of Books, or and an op-ed in the Washington Post? What's the difference when there's no peer review process, or a podcast? And so we're trying to recognize where are the places for post-publication peer review that would enable tenure promotion committees to understand the value of what they're being presented with when it's outside their ken. It's not what they're used to. So Wilfrid Laurier Press, I know, has been a pioneer in this for post-publication peer review for podcasts, scholarly podcasts that are deeply informed by scholarship. And we're trying to both recognize those forms, but help folks who didn't cut their teeth, research-wise on these new forms of scholarship to understand how to value them.
Yeah. And are there challenges to that? Those, the peer review and the assessment of those different things. And how do we address those questions?
Absolutely. So how many major newspaper op-eds add up to an article in a referee journal? These are tough questions. At the same time, you have to ask yourself how much work, how much knowledge, how much scholarly expertise went into everything that enabled you to publish that op-ed, so that op-ed doesn't have footnotes, but what does it represent for in terms of the expertise of the author? So this varies again by sector. So if you're in a Research One institution and you have all kinds of support for your research, you have funds for travel and going to archives, one set of expectations. You're in a regional comprehensive institution, an MA granting institution, you have another set of expectations, and those expectations may involve community engagement, because you're much more place-based in a regional comprehensive. If you're in a small liberal arts school or a community college, again, different standards. And that's why, we are really working hard in the committees that are working on this to recognize sector differences as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There are certainly challenges in different domains, how different content is created, shared, and used. If you're in theater, for example, performances are
right
post-publication peer review all the time.
That's for sure. Yeah, no, that's for sure. And in the humanities, you have creative arts as well, often in the same department. You have your creative writers and your literary critics in the same department. You have your playwrights sometimes, no, that's absolutely right. And so it's a constant, as Bree was saying in the last session, I mean, this is always evolving. None of this is ever set. And we're trying to get ahead of it. At the same time, we know our members are way out ahead of us, and we rely on them, to get us up to speed on what we need to do to serve them. Because if a member comes to us and says, I've been working on a multi-year project with a community group that involves all my students and involves, me knowing X, Y, and Z and doing all this research to produce an event or create a digital archive, or how can I get my my dean to understand what the value of that is. And that's where national organizations like the National Humanities Alliance or a disciplinary association like ours can say, here's what's going on nationwide, here's how other institutions are valuing this, here's the conversation nationally. That's where national groups can help.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important role that you all can play when you're talking about, you don't want a situation where only those who are advanced in their careers, who are safe in their positions, who are well-resourced institutions can engage in this kind of research or these kind of activities, because, that is self-reinforcing and self-excluding. It's very self-referential and excluding those people who are not part of that well-resourced kind of dominant culture.
And what happens is, so the ad hoc committee that's looking at public scholarship, for example, at the moment, is kind of holding our feet to the fire and saying, you say you value public scholarship, you understand this is important, but you publish the flagship journal in language and literature studies, PMLA. PMLA publishes very, recognizably traditional research. It's the ultimate, standard in peer review, that is. And where's the room in let's put your money where your mouth is, they're saying to me. How do you value this scholarship if you don't publish it, or if you don't cite it in the bibliography? And we're seeing more and more in the MLA International Bibliography, they're expanding more and more to say, all right, what's a scholarly website? How do we index that? How do we tag that? How do we link to it? So we know we're, again, always scrambling to try to respond to members who are saying to us, put your money where your mouth is. Do you value this stuff, or don't you value it?
Yeah. And it's always a challenge. We get this, NISO gets this in its own way, in its different application of, are we conforming to NISO standards? Like, how are we leading the community, rather than just following? So it's great to hear that you are dealing with these issues in your own way, one executive director to another. One of the challenges of moving some of these things forward have to do with the economics, right? And the business model of how associations are run, how publishers are moving forward. Many scholarly publishers are tied to associations. Can you talk a little bit about how the finances of supporting some of these new efforts are working, right? So do you have resources, or can you take resources from one aspect of your business to help support publication or development of new types of resources that push the envelope in some ways?
Yeah. Now, it's a good question, because and as we heard over and over today, the OA model's complicated. Open educational resources are free at one end, but not free to produce. And how do you cover your costs to make that kind of thing happen? One of our issues has been, I'll take the MLA handbook, for example. So we're in the 9th edition of the MLA handbook. You can see it over my shoulder there with the rainbow on it. That just came out. So traditionally our model for sales of the MLA handbook. So before, let's say, before I was in college, which was a long time ago, MLA handbook sales were pretty steady year after year. You would, it would be assigned, students would buy it, and then they would buy it the next year. And then you all of a sudden had resale of books. And so now our model is year one, the handbook comes out and the sales are up here. Year 2, 3, 4, 5, they just tank because the same copy is sold over and over and over again to students on a campus or nationally. But also, that's a model that depends on individual handbook sales to individual students. And though it's low priced, it $20 to an undergraduate is not $20 to me. It's a very different $20. And so we've been looking around, what is a model that would make this that would be more sustainable for us and better for students. And unfortunately, you librarians, this falls on you then, right? The model then transfers from individual students buying the handbook to now we have a product called Handbook Plus, which is online access to the handbook and supplementary materials associated with the handbook that is sold as a subscription to libraries. So where your library used to maybe buy 10 copies of the handbook for students to use, now they would buy a subscription to the handbook, and every student at your university then has access to the handbook. So it's not number limited. It's every student and every faculty member gets access to the handbook. So this is, many more students get access. They get access for free. We have a more steady income. It's not a better income, but it makes it easier to budget. And we worked really hard to keep the price as low as possible, and it's tiered so that institutions with at different levels subscribe at different rates. So that's the kind of shift that we think helps students, enables faculty members to assign with the free conscience, not assign one more book that costs $20 more to a student. But, many in your audience, they say, oh my God, here's one more subscription product, that we have to spend library budget on in addition to all the other ones you have. But we are fully prepared to help you make that argument to your administration. Contact Mary Honorato, you all know her, and she will help you make that argument to your administration, and we'll put you in touch with Angela Gibson to help you do that. Anyway, that's one example of the kind of shift we've had to do. We have open access publications, but they're about the profession rather than research journals. And again, this Public Humanities Committee is pushing hard for some kind of public scholarship open access publication for us to make available as well. And so we're trying to figure out what that might look like if that becomes a possibility. But as your viewers probably know, we publish books, but those books are all teaching volumes. They're all text in translation for teaching with, their options for teaching text, their approaches to teaching individual authors, Emily, Wuthering Heights, or Toni Morrison, and volumes like Teaching in Prison. We have a volume coming out on teaching in prisons and social justice teaching, things like that. So all of our publications, other than PMLA, are about pedagogy and the profession.
Yeah. Are there challenges that you and your community face in the humanities when it comes to open access publishing? Because, as I said at the outset, there isn't the sort of funding there is no billion-dollar organization handing out $100,000 grants to the humanities, unfortunately, that could support journal publication at $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 publication fee. How does organizations in the humanities, how do you navigate that um, desire or even mandate about open access when their resources can't support, the financial resources can't support it?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, and I'm not the one to ask about the ramifications of Plan S for the humanities, but um, we, we make some content available from PMLA, but not the whole journal. I mean, we couldn't exist if we didn't sell subscriptions to the journal, and we're not willing to transfer the cost onto the author for publication for the sake of making it open access. Our people don't have budgets for that. I remember when I was a dean at a regional comprehensive institution, and a faculty member, came to me with a request for a subvention, and they're so rare in the humanities that that people would have. I gave them the money, but it was. I mean, we all had to talk about it. It was a big deal. It was not. There's no budget for that in the humanities at all. So, I I think we'll be forced to reckon with this eventually in terms of publishing research. But in the short run, until we get the kind of subsidy you would need in order to be able to make this stuff available for free. I don't know where the subsidy would come from. AU Press's, people are not getting the subsidies they need, in the humanities. We're just, it's a tough situation, Todd. I don't know what to tell you.
And, oh, believe me, I raised this question. I think I've said this repeatedly. You know, my wife is a professor in the humanities,
Mhm.
and if she gets $1,000, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And so I don't think I personally see the difference between institutions, between different fields and domains that are well resourced and well funded, and
Mhm.
the expectations around open access that support that. Um, that is not the experience in the humanities, and
Yeah,
trying to fit a model.
we do have, I mean, we do have, the Humanities Commons was developed at the MLA by Kathleen Fitzpatrick, and that's an open access platform for the humanities that has a repository where, for example, Kathleen's book Generous Thinking, which you all should buy if you don't have it already, was, I mean, she engaged in pre-publication open peer review of that manuscript on the Commons. The whole book was on the Commons before it was published for feedback and responses, and then she published it and sold it. And we heard about that earlier in the day. That model works. You can have a book that's freely available, and people will still want to buy it in paper. And so the Humanities Commons repository has lots and lots of stuff. There's both preprints there, but also post-publication stuff is put there in an attempt to make freely available stuff that academia.edu, ResearchGate make money off of. So Humanities Commons is there, and we fully participate in that. And as I said, we were the initial host and paid the developers for many years for that. So we believe in that model. We just can't afford to use that model for everything that we publish, but member to member, that's really important for us to make that available.
Oh, sure. And I think fundamentally, no one is writing a you're not writing a literary criticism of Henry James to make millions. It's just not. It there's value and interest and passion in creating this content and and really important scholarship. It is by no means the path to riches.
No,
Um,
but it is what we have to facilitate is to make sure that when you're doing that work, if you publish it in a non-traditional way, the work itself still gets recognized, and still gets valued. And that's where a disciplinary association can help. So if you've done, some incredible project on Henry James, but it's not a monograph or it's not a peer-reviewed article, um, but it's out there for the public in some way, we have to figure out how to get you this the the mechanism around that to make it possible for that thing to be valued by your tenure and promotion committee. Because chances are, if you're not doing it through a traditional peer-reviewed process, you're doing it because you want a lot of people to read it. You want a lot of people to get access to it, more people than would get access to it probably through a peer-reviewed process. And good for you, for sharing and for, and so that's why it's really important for us to make possible a reward system, to help make possible a reward system for that work.
yeah, yeah, people need to be recognized, and authors want to be read.
Yes.
Um, that's the core feature of this. They want to be accessed. They want to share their ideas and contribute to the conversation about whatever their subject is.
And when they're, I did an op-ed recently that I thought was really good, and I couldn't get it placed in a good, national publication. The Post turned it down, the LA Times turned it down. I thought, damn it, this is good. I've got to get it out there. And in the end, I got it published by WGBH, which is a radio station in Boston. But all I needed was the link, right? All I needed was for somebody to publish it and for it to be open. And then I could share that link everywhere. And it was, what's the difference if it was published in the Post or there? The same people got to read it, maybe not as many, but I was able to share it in the same way. And that's really what this new environment is making possible. And again, that's what we have to build a structure around.
Yeah. So I will end in a sort of self-serving way. Are there ways that we, the technology community, information standards community, NISO, um, are there ways in which we can help support that? Are there things that we can do to either help in the inclusivity that Bree was talking about, the metadata, the identifiers that Liz
Yeah,
was
yeah.
talking about? Are there things that you see, areas where we can lend a hand?
That's a really good question. And I invite my colleagues who are at the webinar to weigh in on the chat on that, from the bibliography, especially, who would know. But I think um, in terms of what we're doing that NISO folks can help with, I'm very interested in an equity audit of what we do. I'm interested in how to arrange for and pay for an equity audit, especially of the bibliography. We've been talking about this for a couple of years. The folks at the bibliography have been saying, here's what as I mentioned in the last session, here's what we identified as a problem. Here's a term we used to use and we don't use it anymore. Should it disappear? As Bree was pointing out, should it stay as a historical record? What's the best way of referring to this? What do we do with dead naming as an issue? There are so many issues around equity in relation to the bibliography, but also our other publications. Would NISO have, and Greg tells me that we're participating in the author name change working group. That's excellent. I'm glad, because I wrote that down and I was going to ask. But, is there, do you keep you have names of consultants for things like equity audits. I mean, does NISO keep track of who does the work on various issues like that we could consult? So if I'm lucky enough to eventually get one of these grant proposals funded, I would come to NISO and say, all right, who can help me with this? Who's doing the work? Oh, Greg has been unmuted. You want to say something aloud, Greg?
It would be terrific if we could have, yeah, a list of resources. And, just I'm on the NISO DEIA committee, and, happy to be working there and attending, the workshops. And just a wealth of resources have, come out of that work. And we are undertaking, I wouldn't say systemic, but wide-ranging
Absolutely.
spot analyses and reviews of terminology in the thesaurus. And all of our thesaurus editors are very aware and active in looking at the issues that are involved. But we need help too. We're fortunate in the bibliography to have a network of volunteer field bibliographers who also help us out on these issues.
Yeah, and tip of the hat to Mary Honorato in the chat. Mary, didn't mean to imply that we don't look at these things. The reason why we're talking about it is because we're always looking at this, always looking at it. Yeah.
Yep.
Mary, you got something else?
No, I just wanted to make sure that point was made, that it is a continual effort, but as Greg says, we can always use help. It's an enormous and complicated subject area.
Indeed it is. And as Bree pointed out, it's important to have experts look at experts on individual issues, assess, especially on equity concerns. That it's one thing for me feeling like I understand what bias is and feeling like but I'm not a member of a Native American community, or I'm not a member of the trans community. There are things I can flag that maybe they're an issue, but I wouldn't know how to solve them. So we recognize that, and we have subject matter experts who are constantly pointing issues out to us and helping us reframe. But NISO is where the people are who know this stuff.
And that's actually a really interesting idea, and I'll flag that, something that we can take back to our DEIA committee, potentially creating a marketplace or a forum where people who have this expertise can share it with people who want to apply it. That might be an interesting way in which NISO can help support the community.
I think that's right. I think in social media, it's really easy to snipe at or to pick holes and to find problems. But what we recognize is that there's well-intentioned people behind stuff who would love help fixing things, and that's something that that creating a stable of potential of people who can add their expertise, but would be so helpful. I know if I look at something and I see some a casual treatment of a gay or lesbian thing that bothers me, and I think, oh, why didn't they get that right? But I never think, geez, I could help them get that right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think there needs to be a lot less sniping and a lot more helping. I think that would be really.
But that's why communities like NISO are important, and communities like the MLA, that our that's what these kinds of professional associations do, is create communities that can make change together. And that's why I just feel like membership is so important. Membership in NISO, and formerly in NFACE, and and membership in scholarly associations, that where people really understand a shared purpose, and moving a whole field forward together. Anyway, thank you for this opportunity.
No, this has been wonderful and fantastic. Thank you, Paula. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time today. And thank you for all the things that you do, not only for NISO, but the humanities community writ large. Thank you.
Really enjoyed it, Todd. Thank you for the whole day. I learned a ton.
Good. Thank you.